is a full webinar series. This is this webinar is brought to you by the TAS Farm Innovation Hub and Pinion's Water Efficiency Project. The first webinar we looked at was a seasonal snapshot going around all the dryland probes and weather stations that we have around the state, and talking about when to start irrigating. So this one, what we're going to look at is have the same look at the weather stations, but we're also going to look around our irrigation strategies coming into our peak ETO season now. So we'll break that into two, but we'll get started. So just a quick overview of the moisture probe locations and how that relates to you and what's happening at your place. So wherever we've put a probe in the ground on a dryland site, we've tried to be representative soil types and pastures. The sites are a combination of the AgLogic Weather Station Network, which was funded by the TAS Farm Innovation Hub and AgriFutures, and also farming forecaster sites. Where we've located probe is usually on the dry side of average, so we can use that as a bit of an early warning system. So it's not in a low-lying area, it's on a mid-slope, so that gives us a bit of an early warning system for when things are starting to dry off. So you can hopefully use this information as a bit of a reference on your farm based on your topography and soil type. Again, just a bit of an overview. So how the factors that affect soil moisture within your area are the soil type. Sorry, I've been told that I can't just check my screen sharing. There you go. I think that should work. So the things, sorry, there's a bug here somewhere. There you go. Better. Okay, apologies for that. I know more about soil moisture than I do technology, hopefully. So the things that we want to look at in terms of what affects soil moisture on a landscape level is soil type, so the water holding capacity. So the lighter your soil, the less water it holds, so it will dry off sooner, and also infiltration. Some soils dry, as they dry off, they don't, water doesn't infiltrate as readily as other soils, such as red ferrous soils, which have high infiltration rate. Rainfall efficacy is another one. In Tassie, we've had some thunderstorms come through. Great. There's some areas that have had, between 20 and 30 mils, but how much of that's actually efficiently gone into the soil, purely because the application rate was higher than the infiltration rate. And then location, so topography and microclimate, how much of that's facing towards north, south, and things like that. So these are the kind of things you want to take into account. So if we then look at the graphs that we'll look at, this is one of the earlier ones that went in as a farming forecaster site in the Fingal Valley. We've got the current data is the blue line, and here on the right-hand side of the graph is the latest data information. The yellow line's last year's data overlaid, and the green line's the year before that. Most of the graphs have the blue line and last year's data overlaid. So as we collect more data, we'll start to get a greater visual on how that site's behaved over the years, and we can start making decisions, more robust decision making. So we'll start in the northwest. So what I'll do here is I'll show you the graphs from the last presentation. So in this case, it was just over a month ago, and how we're tracking since then. So I'm on to you up the northwest. We can see that last year, a month ago, it was sitting quite well, but moisture's pretty much matched where we are the same time. This same time of year. As we go to Edith Creek, they had rainfall event in early December, which really had a large impact on pasture growth, and they're still seeing that pasture growth coming through, and the rain that we've had recently just kept things topped up, so they're looking pretty good compared to where to last year. If we go a bit further southeast to Yolla, they got that early December rainfall, which really had a big impact in terms of getting soil moistures back up to pretty much to a full level. So up till then, they matched what was going on last season. And as I like to say, there's no free lunch when it comes to soil moisture. It all gets used up. somewhere along the line, as we can see there. So last year, based on where we were last month, we were pretty much a similar position, in a pretty similar position now, but it's this area here that has meant that pasture growth was prolonged. It was kept out of vegetative, kept its vegetative state for longer, so there was more feed available. So yeah, getting a day-by-day snapshot really gives you an indication of how useful it was to your pasture growth. And then if we go down to South Rhino, a bit further down the coast, we can see here that they got the rains in December, which they got last year in December, and it got them into a similar amount, but that's been used up, and we're actually a bit behind where we were, but summer rainfall comes and goes in areas, as we just experienced in the last week, so we're pretty close to similar. And if we go, and then we go to sassafras, just got this one for this week. You can see this has a similar to Yola, so they got rainfall that came through there that really gave them a really good boost there, but they've pretty much matched where they were last year. Well, after looking through these graphs, what I thought I'd do, just as a bit of a past look at what's happened and how that's affected this season, and we'll do this a bit more going on as we can compare year on years, is what actually drove to. So the Northwest Coast was a much better season than we had last year, but what actually contributed to what rainfall and what contributed to the really good pasture growth that we saw throughout the Northwest Coast. So what I did, I grabbed 4 different graphs that we just looked at and just kind of indicate what was actually going on to lead to that excess pasture growth. So we can see in Montague, usually we have a wet winter, and that sits wet. So it takes longer for that. For those pastures to keep growing off in spring because they're sitting waterlogged. We didn't have a wet winter, all right. So we only had a period of a month or two where we were sitting, at that closer saturation point. So the pasture was able to take off a lot sooner. So that there was a massive win for that circular head region in kicking the season off early. And then we had that December rain, which was another boost for them. So those were the 2 drivers that led to increased pasture growth in the circular head region. If you go to Edith Creek, that same rainfall, they got a lot more rainfall, but that was actually a bit of an impediment for them. So they did sit wet, and you can see they sat wet for longer than they would usual seasons, and also soil temperature was down. So it took a bit longer for them to kick off. So they didn't have the same growth through September, October, whereas the circular region did. They were having really good growth in August because they had the temperatures and they didn't have the saturation. But Edith Creek did. So this winter rainfall actually and heavy spring rainfall actually slowed pasture growth. But it was this rainfall here in December that made a really big difference in terms of boosting that pasture growth through those early summer months. So if we then go to South Rhino, this here we never. Similar to that Montague probe, we never hit that wet winter. Every rain that fell, you can see here, it was taken up by the pasture. So pasture growth was happening in August where it usually wouldn't. But then, as I said, there's no free lunch. They got used up pretty quickly, but that December rain came to the rescue, and now it's looking pretty dry. We need another rain like that to kind of keep things propping along. And sassafras, while it was a pretty average winter in there, we had a rain in October that propped things up, and that rain in December that kind of kept things going. So what we're looking at is the difference between that yellow line and the blue line. That's pretty much what's giving us our extra pasture growth compared to last year. So if we can look at this year on year and see where we are this year compared to previous years, and if you've got really good note keeping and you've taken notes and dates of when you've done certain things like cut silage or cut hay, you can start to see where you are sitting compared to other years and see how you're travelling. So if we go across the northeast, Winnalea had that rainfall, which was sitting, which was making it look pretty good. So up until that rain, it was matching similar to the previous year, and that's kind of slowed down a bit. So it's used up that moisture, but we can see while it's not the same soil moisture level, it's leveled off a little bit. So it's told me that the pasture's starting to slow down a little bit, and it's left a bit of residual soil moisture in the profile. If you go across to Kananga, which is closer to Waterhouse, we can see here that's doing a similar thing. Okay, so really, the pasture really exhausted the soil moisture here. We've got a bit of a kick in December, but the pasture had gone to, it was not early enough to stop us from going into a vegetative start, into a reproductive phase. And so we've left a bit of soil moisture in the bank there. So if we go down to the Northern Midlands, we can see at Hagley, that December here was some of the largest rainfall events happened there. That was really good for the dryland producers, but not so good for peas and poppies, and a lot of pea crops just got a bit too wet, and contributing to that was due to that rainfall. But we can see here we created a really great bank of soil moisture for those dryland grazing, but came at a really good time, but they got used up pretty quickly. So we're about the same point, but again, that feed window there is really what's been the big difference between this year and last year. If we go into Bishopsburn, we can see here, I think I've skipped a graph there. Yeah, so Bishopsburn, similar thing, similar story, a bit less rainfall, but we can see that that gap there has made a big difference, and the pasture and the moisture has been used up by the pasture. If we go a bit further through past Longford down to Elsdon, we can see they got that rainfall, but they'd already dried out a fair bit, so they didn't get a lot of the rainfall that we got a bit further up north. So the situation was already dry. So two things happened there. The main one was that the site's dry, so high crusting has increased, so infiltration has decreased. So the rains that they did get in December weren't as impactful or as effective in getting getting into the soil profile. So pasture had already gone to a vegetative state by then, into a reproductive phase by then, and the rainfall didn't really get into the profile. And the thunderstorms that we got have done the same. So this is just sitting. It just shows how when a site doesn't get as there's a well-timed rain, it doesn't keep the soil at a level where it helps in terms of getting better infiltration. And this is when you look at different parts of your farm that they might be performing a lot differently. That's when I recommend and advise get a shovel and have a bit of a dig and see why this part of your farm didn't respond like this part of your farm did. It might be low-lying area, so that's held more moisture and a lot of the water has gone to that area, or it's a slope which has got a bit more of a loamy soil that might crust and go hydrophobic. There's a lot of different things with that. So if you can dig a hole and have a bit of a look, have a bit of a play, and actually start to see what part of your paddocks are performing and why, that's always going to help in terms of interpreting this data as well. So Parkham, back up north, that got some rain through there that created that gap, but again, usually that it's got used up pretty quick smart, and that's plateaued out. So again, they didn't get that rainfall that really propped things up there, so their pastures went to a reproductive phase, so we've left a bit of moisture in the bank. So go down to Southern Midlands. Again, similar to that Elsdon site, dried out a lot quicker. So when you look at that, you got an inch of rain there and some follow-up rain, you'd expect a greater impact, especially on a sandier site like this, but it was just dry. So hydrophobicity came into play here, so we didn't get as great infiltration, and so we've just kind of stayed around that level. But in saying that, if you get your low-lying areas in this same landscape, they'll be performing a lot better because that rainfall that didn't infiltrate there would be going to those areas down there. And then we go further down south, down the Tunbridge Woodbury area, ticking along pretty similar to last year. Last year they got some rains that got used up, but here instead of this being the rainfall that we got to go towards pasture growth, it was earlier in the season. So this is a bit of a highlight that as we look at this data year on year, we can start to understand where is our feed window and where are our feed gaps, where do we need to try and conserve feed to maintain stocking rates. East Coast and Fingal Valley, these are ones a bit out of the bag in terms of the last week based on the rainfall. But if we look at the East Coast, we can see that they got that great December rain that got used up, and they got another follow-up rain, but they were quite dry, especially compared to where we were last year. So infiltration there, similar to some of the Midlands, wasn't as effective. Same as Kelvedon, they got some rainfall in December that was really great, but then they're pretty much matched where they are last year. If you go to the Fingal Valley, where the latest wave of thunderstorms came through were quite isolated. So as the crow flies, you could see differences in over over 2 kilometres as a crow's fly, between 30 mils at one end and 7 mils at the other. So it was quite oscillating in terms of events. But we can see here that they got a fair bit of rain through that early December, but they got that again last week. So it kind of sat in the Fingal Valley for a couple of days. If you had a look at the rain radar, it was sitting there and not really moving. So a nice bit of rain there through the Fingal Valley, which has been drier than most of the state through this part of the period of the year. They got a lot of rains that the northwest of the parts of the state didn't. So you can see here that much welcome rain for those guys. And if we come across the Speyside, which is closer to the Midlands Highway, they got that rain too, which has propped things up compared to where things were last year. So it would be interesting to see how whether this rainfall through the Fingal Valley will be used by the pasture, or if it's just going to start to contribute to winter refill. So if we go down to the Drought Valley, things are looking really good down there compared to last year. They had rainfall in September and July that a lot of the states didn't get, but things are starting. That's all been used up. So being used up, and they're at a similar point. But again, that feed window was really important for them to get ahead, especially with lambing. Same thing closer to Bothwell. We can see here that was really a different season to last year, and we can see here that we're pretty much caught up. If the moisture is available, the pastures going to use it up. In the Coal Valley, we can see here that we're very similar to where we were last year. Some nice welcome rainfall events that got used up very quickly, but it's quite a dry part of the state, so it's not unusual. This one here we talked about last time, whereas last year was so dry that there wasn't enough soil in the moisture for roots to actually get down into that part of the soil, mainly because the penetration resistance was so high. A wetter spring has meant the penetration resistance has decreased, which means we can get increased root growth, which has meant the plants have been able to utilise this moisture further down in the profile, which they couldn't last year. So, and they've kept being able to utilise this moisture as well. So a bit of preferential flow where the water goes down deeper in the profile has been happily used up by the pastures in that part of the world. So if you go up to the islands, Happy Valley, which is just outside of the Flinders Island capital, we can see here that there was a December rain which had a great impact there compared to where they were looking to trend similar to last year. That's been used up, and things are starting to track towards similar time last year, but it's still a way to go. We can see here we've got this pasture is a lucerne mix, so we can see the lucerne's drawing moisture happening down now at 110, 120 centimetres. And if we go a bit further up to heavier soil types, so Happy Valley is pretty much beach sand. We can go to more heavy soil type in the middle of the island. We can see here that these rainfall events will really welcome. We had some really good rainfall here early in the season that got used up pretty quickly, but these rainfall events have really kicked things along nicely. They've been used up, but again, if there's that feed window there, that gap there, that has made a large difference in the available grazing for farmers on that part of the island. If we swing across the King Island, those December rains were magic. As we're coming along, we were pretty similar to last year, but we had that growth in August that continued along, which was really, really positive for King Island. But that December rain was a real win. That's starting to be used up, and things are starting to dry off. The thing that happened here, interesting thing in King Island here, is a lot of really good growth in August, similar to what we saw at Montague in the Circular Head, because usually they're waterlogged. So we don't get any real growth, spring growth until here. But it happened in August because the plants could breathe, so they're growing south. Feed window shifted from this period to this period. So this rainfall, while it was very welcome, a lot of the ryegrass had already gone into a reproductive phase, and a lot of this rainfall has led to increased clover growth. So there's been a lot of clover growing on the island as opposed to ryegrass because of the timing of this rain. So again, what's the rain worth to you? If you're a predominantly ryegrass system, a little bit too late. If you've got clover or some other understory species, that can keep things kicking along. But again, this one here's got a lucerne mix through it. We can see drawing moisture quite happily down to depth, but it is starting to go to flower. So we're getting to that phase where it's starting to start to draw up most of what's available to it. If we go a bit further south, we can see Pagara here, which is on a bit of a loamier country. That December rain propped it above where we were, and it's tracking pretty similar last year in terms of that pasture uptake. So utilising that soil moisture. And then if we go to Linwood, which is more of a wetter part, hasn't got as much rain as the other parts. It got that nice December rain, but it's used that up very quickly. So it's pretty much on par. But again, we had this early August growth, and we had this feed window through here. So the island's while it's dried out, it's definitely in a better position to where it was last year. So there are our dryland sites, and just tracking month on month. We'll do this again in a month or so's time to see how that's going. But we just want to go into the irrigated component of the webinar. So last time we spoke about when to start, and I put ... again because we had that great winter rainfall in December that kind of reset everything. So the things that we needed to be doing coming out of spring that we may have missed on in terms of when we need to start irrigating, we got a bit of a reprieve. So we kind of reset again and try and get those things right the second time. So we had a bit of a look at that, and with that, what we were talking about was how big is our bucket in terms of early season plantings and late season plantings. So here was an early season planting. We had a big bucket. All right, we had a big bucket based on roots going down deeper into the profile, as opposed to a late planted potato where we were only really accessing the top 20 centimeters of the mold. So we had little buckets, trying to break it down into an easy going. Well, how big is your bucket? How deep are your roots going? How much moisture can your soil hold? And seeing how early on in the season we're talking about dealing with a little bucket, so we got a little irrigate little and often, because if we're irrigating and overflowing the bucket with it, it's not really worth much to us. But later in the season, as the crop matures, we've got a bigger bucket, so we've got the capacity to put more water on. So what I want to talk about now is, when is your shovel not quite enough? How deep are you digging? And now this is kind of where all the people go, oh no, it's that bloke trying to flog moisture probes again. He's trying to sell us gear. And that's where people go, oh, I don't need a probe. I use my shovel. And just so just to alleviate your worries, I love shovels. I love digging holes. My wife even bought me a shovel for our wedding anniversary a couple of years ago. So if you think I'm all about the probes and not about the shovels, then yeah, please don't be worried. So what I want to look at here is when we go and do a paddy dig, and I'm all for it and I encourage it, and I'd say dig more holes and dig deeper holes. Understanding what we're actually seeing when we're digging our holes. Now, if we go out there and we dig a hole, the depth of our shovel blade, let's just, what's that, 20, 30 centimeters, let's just say. So if we're digging this part of the year, so, that mid-December, and we're digging around here and going, well, yep, this is good. I know my crop's happy. It's a young crop. I'm putting on what I need to. Soil moisture is looking great. Fantastic. Then you do it next week and you go, yep, I'm very similar. So you can see in here, digging the top 30 centimeters. Things are looking exactly the way they were back in mid-December. Fantastic. You've come back after New Year's and you've gone, yep, things are going great. You've then come and had a couple of nice rainfall events, and you come and dig, a couple of weeks later, a week later, and go, it is exactly the same as when I felt it back in the new year and back in mid-December. Things are going great. I'm keeping up with my crop water demands. The thing is, you're digging here, but deeper down at 50 and 60 centimeters, we can start to see your crop is starting to draw moisture down deeper. Now, what that's telling us is, yes, we're keeping up with the top 30 centimeters, but it's not enough that's keeping up with our crop demand. So our crop is now drawing moisture up deeper because we're not putting quite enough on. All right, so this is one example here that we can see here. And this is, I decided to make this the topic because purely based on what I'm seeing regularly in a lot of my probes around the state. So, we have about 300-400 probes in cropping and so annual cropping and also perennial cropping. So this is what we kind of see this time of year that can be a pitfall if you don't have a probe or the data in your paddock. So we'll go to another paddock now here as well, and the same thing. We can see here consistency in how we're irrigating the top 30 centimeters. Fantastic, looks great. If we went and dug a hole that deep, things will be looking perfect. But as we can see here in this case, we can see here we're already, and these are potato plants, we can already see that we're drawing moisture down at 80 centimeters. So really, we're not quite keeping up with crop water demand. Now, there's this one that's starting to get a bit worried. This one here, I'm not getting too worried, because this is actually what we want to start doing as we get to full canopy, and as we start to get to the crop factors of 1.2, 1.3, we actually do want to start drawing a little bit of this moisture up, because what it does mean is if we get a large rainfall event or a thunderstorm come in a couple of months' time, or when you're coming close to harvest, it means that we've got somewhere to store the moisture. But so this is kind of perfect here in terms of what we want to be doing. But we've had this rainfall here that's kind of propped us up. But now we just need to be aware what we were doing before in terms of our irrigation scheduling. It won't cut it in about a week's time. So we need to up it a little bit just to make sure that we're not going into this, right? This is good. This is starting to get a bit too much. So we need to up our irrigation. And there's early warning signs. So if we look at this paddock here, we can see here that that top 30 centimeters, we're irrigating it nicely. We're drawing down at 30, we're drawing down to 40. And we can see that those irrigations went well. And what we could see here was we were just starting to tick at 50, okay? And the farmer, he saw that and he go, right, he responded to that, because these plants are a little bit younger. So we're not quite at the stage where we want to draw that subsoil moisture up too excessively to create a buffer. But he saw that, and so he responded with those 3 irrigations and happily brought things back up to where they were. So then we can start to tick along. And then when we want to be strategic by drawing a bit of that subsoil moisture, we know we've got the capacity to do it. So those were 3 potato paddocks, but now we want to look at a carrot seed crop, and we can see here, carrot seed crops, they just play by their own rules. We can see here, yep, if you dug to the top 10 centimeters, everything looks fine, everything looks great. But those plants, they're like ducks. They just look fine on top, but they're padding like crazy underneath, and they're drawing moisture up really deep. So we can see here that this is drawing moisture up quite readily at 80 centimeters. And if you're seeing a moisture curve like this at 80 centimeters, there's a fair chance that you've got roots that are drawing moisture down deeper. So we've got to make sure that we don't just concentrate on that top 10, 20 centimeters. What we're doing is making sure that we're trying to account for what's going on down here, because if something happens, that a pivot breaks down, or you can't quite get onto it, or we have start having infiltration issues, we don't have a buffer to rely on. And that's really important, especially now at our peak ETO. I mean, things like carrot seed crops, you want to make sure that you're maintaining really good nectar flow, so making sure that we have good soil moisture is key. So in the event of not having a moisture probe, we can use things such as ETO, evapotranspiration, to give us a bit of an idea of what our crop water demands are. So this is what I've just pulled off the Longford weather station, which is the Longford location in the AgLogic weather station network. And we can see here, one of the thunderstorms fell on Longford, which was nice. So we've got about 18 mils fell there, 18 mils fell in 15 minutes, and we got a little bit extra. But what the major component here that I want you to look at is this ETO, so evapotranspiration. So this is set with a crop factor of 1. So it gives us a bit of an indication of how much water your plant's using based on a crop factor of 1 per day. And that table here will tell us here. So if we look at the last 7 days, we've got an average plant water use of 5.13 millimeters per day. That's reduced a little bit, mainly because we've had these rainfall days, cloudy days. But if we have a look here at this 2025, so year to date, so the last 18 days, we've been averaging 6.2 mils per day. So if we just look at the last week and we go 5.3 times 7, 35 mils is what we require if we have a crop factor of 1 for our irrigation requirements. Now, just for this site, we're lucky enough to get some rainfall, so 35 minus 23, which is our weekly rainfall event. So 35.9 was our weekly evapotranspiration. If we minus what our rainfall was, we can still see, yep, while that rain came through, it was great. It felt like a lot. We are still 12 mils behind. And if you didn't get that rainfall, so Cressy, which is 10 kilometres away, they got 2 mils, I think. So if you're looking at that going, well, we can just discount most of that. So we're probably looking at, even though we got that thunderstorm, we're probably still needing to put on 30 mils there. And then if we look at our ETO over the last few days, last couple of weeks, we're looking at that and going, well, 6.2, that gives you about 44 mils a week. So up until this point, for all of January, we've been needing to put on an average of 40 to 50 mils a week to keep up with our crop water demands. So that can give you a bit of an indication, without having probe data, what you need to be doing, and hopefully that's making sure that you're not drawing that subsoil moisture that we saw. So we look at these numbers here, and if we just have a look at what's going to happen for the next week, we can see we've got some warm days. So we're probably going to be looking around the ETOs of around 6s and 7s as opposed to those 5.3s that we had. So also what I want to talk about is what's going on, is it going in? So we see those numbers, you see the graphs, and we go, right, I've got to crank up irrigation. I've got to make sure that I'm not putting in any undue moisture stress on my crop. So what we'll be doing, so the big question is, what is going on? So we put it on, we spin the pivot round, and we chuck the linear on. We'll do what we're doing. We see it going, and we're happy. Water's going on, fantastic. But is it actually going in? So there's two things to start with. Number one is actually going on what it says it's going on. So is it doing what it says it's doing? So it's kind of a system, a application validation. So here is a photo I'll pull out quite often. That it was one where I'll get told the rain gauge is broken, and we go out there and have a look, and that's what the pivot's putting on. So you see the pivot going, you see water coming out, but is it actually going on? So, that part of the paddock, that might be fine, but over here, you miss out, you say we're putting on a 12, 15 mil application, you miss out on 2 or 3 of those, you're behind a week already. So making sure that the amount is what the pivot says it's putting on, or what the irrigator's putting on, and validating that just simply with a catch can make a big difference. One of your Bunnings rain gauges, putting it out there, just having a look is really worthwhile thing doing. But also the uniformity. Okay, how's that going? How's that looking? Are my nozzles clean? Are they unblocked? Those kind of things. And Pinion ran a workshop a couple of months ago on that, which is really worthwhile doing, because if you don't do it, if you haven't done it before you start irrigating, well, by the time we get to it, you're already, you can already be at 30 mils behind very quickly. And the next, so that's system capacity, but the next one is your soil behavior. Okay, so, and the big one we look at now is, does your application rate exceed your infiltration rate? Okay, so when I talk about is your application rate, so what is the rate of water going onto your soil from your irrigator? And the infiltration rate is how quick can that water be absorbed and infiltrate into your soil? If your application rate is greater than your infiltration rate, it's not all going in. It's not physically possible for it to all be absorbed into the soil. And that gets found out by the preferential flow. So usually when we talk about preferential flow, we talk about the vertical, preferential flow, so cracks, or wet parts that have been wet or have a bit of root mass where water is more likely to go into. So you don't have that uniformity of infiltration. So number one, do you have vertical preferential flow? But when we really exceeding when our application rate is really exceeding our infiltration rate, we have preferential flow vertically. So as soon as water starts to run, so as soon as you're irrigating and source, water starts to run, that is suddenly the most preferred way for that water to go. It follows the easiest path. So once you start seeing surface runoff, that's done. You're not getting any infiltration going, because that's where all the water wants to go. All right. So this one here is a sand with hydrophobicity. We can see here, and I've just scraped literally 5 millimeters off the top of the soil. We can see here absolutely no infiltration in the mold. As soon as we start to get some flow, preferential flow off the mold, that's where all the water went into the furrow here. Okay, so that's a bit of an example of that preferential flow on the surface. So you look at your paddock, we're in Tasmania. You're going to have paddock variability unless you're on the, you've got a red, even a red fertile is going to have paddock variability. We're going to have paddock variability. So look for areas that may be susceptible. Higher areas that might be either exposed to wind, either have lighter soil type, and they can be exposed, they can be affected. So go to your susceptible areas, have a bit of a dig after irrigation, and actually see how far your moisture's gone into your soil, just to give you a bit of a reference of what's actually going in as opposed to what's going on. So we talk about that application rate and infiltration rate, and you go, well, that's great, Marek. You've told me I might have a problem, but how do I solve it? So identifying it, you go, well, do you have that surface crusting? So this is a classic case of surface crusting. So that whether it's through compaction or whether it's through degradation of soil structure, that's going to decrease your infiltration drastically. Or you can have hydrophobicity. So that photo that I showed you before, this was a case of a wind-blown sand. And so do you have either of those, and do you have surface runoff? And here's a video I took, hopefully you can play. Irrigation's gone on. I think it was a 12 irrigation event. And you can see what's happening here. So these are the kind of things you need to look at. And these are where the crop is. So how much of it is actually running off. So these are the things you look at. Okay, so if you're getting that, what things can you do? What we really want to look at is trying to maximize our infiltration, and what we can do through there is by halving our irrigation rate. So if we're putting on, let's say 15 mils is what we would usually do round in a go. Speeding that up and putting half of it on. So putting on, say, 7 mils in your first go, and that doesn't decrease your application rate, but what it does do is it wets down your soil surface, which breaks down some of that hydrophobicity while it's damp, or breaks down that crusting while it's damp. And if you then run round it again with a next 7 mils, that 7 mils is more likely to be absorbed by the soil. So it's what we're trying to do is maximize that infiltration from what we put on. So we're putting on the same amount, but more of it's going in, because if we put on that 14 mils and we get runoff, let's just say 2 mils of that has gone on and we've already got runoff, well, there's a 13 mils that's just gone. Whereas if we go, okay, 2 mils is what it takes, gets absorbed before you get infiltrated, before we actually then get runoff. Okay, let's say we've wasted 5 mils, but then we come through in the next 7 and most of that gets absorbed by the profile because we've kind of broken that down first. And the next one, which I really like seeing people do, is irrigate during or after a rain. Let the rain do the work for you. And I remember early days when looking at this concept, that I had this old farmer come along at a workshop and go, oh yeah, I know that. It's rushing in the rain. We've done it for years. So it's not a new concept. So yeah, trying to utilize that rain that we have by following with irrigation is a great way of getting good infiltration. And here's an example here. So I'll start here that we're doing irrigations. Now, say irrigation here, here, and here. We could see that a rainfall, and we can see that it's an infiltration problem because we've got an irrigation here which has done absolutely nothing, but we've got a rainfall event, which a rainfall is a lower application than a pivot. We did have infiltration, so you can see we had nice infiltration here. We had a bit of infiltration here, which is nice through these irrigations, but again, not as much as we wanted. And as we start to dry out the profile, we start to see our irrigations were becoming less efficient. So what we suggested, we could see this was happening. We could see we're getting dry up. So we said, well, let's try our back-to-back irrigations. Let's try doing it, not halving it. Let's just do it back-to-back and see what happens. And we can see here, this pretty similar irrigation amount. We could see that we got a little increase similar to that one there, but the second one was a lot more efficient. Okay, so what that first one did was break down that hydrophobicity. In this case, this is a wind-blown sand around the Nile area, broke down the hydrophobicity, and the second one here was a lot more efficient in being absorbed. Then we got some rainfall, and then there was some rainfall that came through, and we irrigated during that rainfall event. And we can see we've got greater infiltration through that rainfall while the rain was falling. Okay, it wasn't much rain, that we didn't need much at all. And we saw the same thing here. A little bit of rain, we followed up with some irrigation. So we could start to creep up. So we could see our gradient was, we were starting to, we're starting to fall behind, but at least now we're starting to at least plateau. So, and then we've seen this strategy works. So now we can start to use that strategy by back-to-back irrigations. It looks like I'm on time, which is amazing. So what I want to do here is just some key takeaways from today's webinar. With our dryland sites, soil moisture profiles are at a similar point as the same time last year, but we had a way better feed window from that September to December. So we had that late winter rain that filled our profile up. It wasn't sitting saturated in many parts of the state. And so we got early season growth that got stretched out with a couple of well-timed rainfall events. But we're kind of matched where we were last year. So we've dried right off. So it'll be interesting to see what the rainfall does in the next couple of months. But a lot of people around the place have now gone to fodder conservation or feed conservation. We've had the opportunity this year to cut hay, which we didn't last year. So hopefully that feed gap that will be created by things drying off now will be able to be filled with those fodder conservation. So it'll be interesting to see how much what rain events we do get in summer to tick us along, and how we look coming into autumn as well. When it comes to irrigated cropping, don't get caught out by falling behind your crop water demands. Really, if you have probe data, really look to interrogate that data and try and use that and match that with your digs. And if you don't have that, use the ETO as a bit of a guide. You can access ETO via the weather station network. We've got weather stations around the place. You can subscribe and jump on and have access to that data on your phone. So these are some key things that you can use. So make sure, and if we go, righto, I'm going to crank up my irrigation because I think I'm falling behind, make sure what's going on is going in. And if it isn't, try and get a couple of, try and maximize irrigations during rain, or look to do some back-to-back irrigations, and then dig some holes and dig more holes and dig deeper holes. All right, really try to reference what I've been talking about with what you're seeing, okay, and how that relates to the variability within your paddock. So dig holes and dig deeper, dig more holes and dig deeper holes, and try and get another shovel for your wedding anniversary or your birthday or Christmas, because you can never have too many shovels. So talking about the weather station network, this is what we have around the state. So there's a QR code there that you can jump onto now and have a look and sign up. Or give me a call or an email if you want to have a bit more of a chat about it, and we can set you up with a bit of a demo to see that the data is something that would be really useful for your on-farm decision making. Also, I want to talk about upcoming webinars and workshops as part of this project that's funded by the Hub and that's run by Pinion. So this is as I said, this is the second of 4 seasonal snapshots that we'll do. The next one will be, what does an autumn break look like? So last year was really interesting in terms of we had rainfall events in autumn and people went out and bought cattle, but actually how efficient was that rain? So what we're going to do is to have a look at what an autumn break actually looks like, and then we'll follow it up with the following seminar at the end of autumn and going, well, did we have an autumn break? We also have some soil 101 workshops coming up, around the different parts of the state. So we'll have them in the Coal Valley, the Midlands, the Northwest, the Northeast, and the East Coast. So that'll be one where we can really dig into the fundamentals of soil science. So bring your soils and we can have a play with them. We can similar to that hydrophobicity and the crusting we're talking about, understand what leads to those kind of issues in your paddocks. And then we'll be following that up with more workshops, which is more pointy end discussions, which is driven by data decision, by data. So bring your questions, bring your data, and we'll turn into a discussion group really to try and work out how we can solve particular problems that you might have on your paddocks. And the last thing that I'd like you to do is just a bit of a webinar feedback. So if you could grab your phones out, if you're watching on your phone, I'm not sure how you can do that, but if you're watching on your laptop, or if you watch back at this, if you could just scan the QR code or jump onto the Hub website, I think, and there'll be forms there that you can give some feedback, just so we can tailor what you want to know and what you want to hear. So thanks again for jumping on, I look forward to the next webinar, which I hope you can join, or workshops that are around the place. They'll be advertised and they'll be emailed out to you as well, times, dates, and places, and content. So thank you very much for joining.